Shalom Aleichem. Look at the Sicha, volume 23, the Sicha on Yud-Beis Tammuz. So the Rabbi begins the Sicha by quoting the previous Rabbi, who wrote about his suffering, imprisonment on Yud-Beis Tammuz, where he was sentenced to death and then eventually miraculously freed, not only from jail and from exile, but completely freed. And the previous Rabbi wrote that he found himself the Rosh Hashanah before the imprisonment saying in the Maimer things that were out of context. And what were the things that he was saying? He mentioned, and I guess explained, the teaching of the Baal Shem Tov about Hashgacha Pratis, divine providence. That divine providence is not just for humans, but also animals, vegetations, and minerals. Every single thing is by divine providence. Meaning to say there are prior great scholars, including Rambam in Moreh Nebuchim, Guide to the Perplexed, and others, Chokrim, Jewish philosophers, etc., who teach the principle of Hashgacha Pratis, that God runs the world. But they see it pre-Chassidus as that is only for humans, being that they're God's chosen people, the chosen creations, and they're here to fulfill the purpose of creation. Therefore, there's Hashgacha Pratis on humans. The Baal Shem Tov adds, no, there's Hashgacha Pratis on every single thing. A little leaf turning around in a forest somewhere is exactly by providence which way it will die and which way it will fall down, and if it will be trampled upon or fall down by accident, etc., as we all know well. And the previous Rebbe said that he found himself saying this into the Maimer. The language is arangezukt in Maimer. When a Rebbe says something in a Maimer, this is powerful. This is a big deal. This is a divine revelation, if you will. And the previous Rebbe said that he sort of found himself almost involuntarily saying it. And in retrospect, he said that this was meant to be. This was in the Maimer on Rosh Hashanah, which sets the stage for the whole year, to allow him, to empower him to endure the suffering of the imprisonment, without which he may not have endured it. It's a very powerful statement. Come along the Rebbe and asks a question. There's really two questions, but the main question is question A. Why did he emphasize that the teaching of the Hashgacha Pratis according to the Baal Shem Tov? As mentioned, Hashgacha Pratis was not invented by the Baal Shem Tov. It's in Torah books for a very, very long time. And many Gedolei Yisrael greats and scholars, including Rambam as mentioned and others, teach the concept. The Baal Shem Tov's addition is that it's on every little thing, even a little leaf, vegetation, inanimate, but the concept of Hashgacha Pratis in general is a well-known concept, and that would suffice, one would think, to help the previous Rabbi endure the imprisonment, to understand that everything that happens to him is by providence. He's not he's a human being. He's not one of those categories that requires the Baal Shem Tov's innovation. Not only is he a human being, he's a Yid, Hashem's close nation. He is a tzaddik. On top of that, he's a Nasi b'Yisrael. He's a leader of the Jewish people. Are you kidding me? This is clearly providential. You don't have to have the innovation of the Baal Shem Tov, that every leaf in the forest is by providence, in order to understand that everything that happens to him is providential. Of course. Basic Rambam. Why would the previous Rebbe make the emphasis that what got him through this, and otherwise he says I might not have endured the suffering of the imprisonment, is what? The teaching of the Hashgacha Pratis in line with the Baal Shem Tov? Animals, vegetation, that every little leaf is by providence. Why would he need that to understand that God was watching over him, a person, a Yid, a Reb, a Tzaddik, and a Rebbe? The Rebbe says that perhaps he's just trying to emphasize that if the Baal Shem Tov teaches that even a little leaf is by providence, etc., every animal, every creature, every insect, how much more so it will bring home the truism that for him, God is certainly with him. The Rebbe suggests that in the footnote, but the Rebbe says if you read the language of the previous Rebbe in that Sicha, he emphasized strongly, according to the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, this wasn't a by the way. Clear from his speech, from the language of the previous Rebbe, that this was very much about the Baal Shem Tov's innovation, and the big question is why? Very strong question. Previous Rebbe, such a Yid, a tzaddik, a nasi, to understand that Hashem is with him and to be able to endure the imprisonment, pain, and suffering, he has to come on to the idea that Baal Shem Tov, Hashgacha Pratis, this is Hashgacha Pratis, basic, age-old Hashgacha Pratis, that would be way sufficient. So the Rebbe asks sort of another question. But as you'll see, the second question is to lay the groundwork to the answer. The second question is even more basic. Why do we even need to employ the concept of Hashgacha Pratis to understand that God was watching over him and protecting him? There's something much more basic even to the general teaching of Hashgacha Pratis as taught by classics of old, and that is the Torah concept that the people from the Talmud, from classic oral Torah, and from the Zohar, those who do a mitzvah can never be harmed. Nothing bad can ever come down from heaven. Everything Hashem does is for good. This is a basic Talmud and basic Zohar, that we accept everything with joy, lekabuli b'simcha, as it says in chapter 26 in Tanya, because it clearly is all for the best. So again, and being that the previous Rebbe was in prison, why? Because of the activities of doing mitzvahs. So this is certainly protected by Hashem. Not only do you not have to come on to Hashgacha Pratis in line to the Baal Shem Tov's teaching, you don't even need the concept of Hashgacha Pratis. Just the basic Talmudic and Zohar concept that everything is for good. Hashem runs the world, and no bad can come down from heaven, especially when you're doing a mitzvah, because this whole activity was all about mitzvahs and spreading Torah. So why do we even need to invoke Hashgacha Pratis at all, let alone the Baal Shem Tov's interpretation of it? Why does it ever bring question B? Because besides that, it's a good question, but this will lay the groundwork to the answer. What the Rebbe is going to come along and say now is, we need to analyze what does the previous Rebbe mean when he says his suffering. Would he not have said that in the Maimer? He would not have endured the suffering of the imprisonment. What kind of suffering does a person like the previous Rebbe, a tzaddik, a Rebbe, experience? Let's understand it. And once we understand it, we'll have the answer to our questions. The first thing the Rebbe is going to rule out, that this is not about physical suffering. It can't be that the previous Rebbe, when he says, I wouldn't endure the suffering of the prisoner, he means the physical pain or the physical fear of the suffering. Because this is not a regular person. This is a tzaddik. This is a Rebbe. And the previous Rebbe quoted in Yud-Tes Kislev, just before the imprisonment, he said, let's grab Mesiras Nefesh. We could see that he almost had a joy in it. A tzaddik, you see, it's not about his body. It's the opposite of by us. By us, it's about we are the body, but we also have a neshama. By a tzaddik is the opposite. He's a neshama, and he also has a body. But the body is an afterthought. His focus is in neshama. His focus is his mission. His focus is his shlichus. And to say that the suffering of the body is so significant that he almost would not be able to endure it, this is not what it means, as we'll elaborate a little more in a second. And therefore, the Rebbe is going to conclude, if it's not about the physical suffering, that explains question B. Why didn't the previous Rebbe just say that by meditating or saying into the Maimer the concept that nothing bad can happen from above, which is a basic Talmudic concept, and nothing can happen to a person doing a mitzvah, which is a basic concept, and then he would be protected? And the answer is, it wasn't about something bad happening to him. You're reading him completely wrong. The Rebbe is teaching us, previous Rebbe is not talking about physical suffering. He's speaking the wrong language. Because were he afraid of physical suffering, he would have said, how did I get through the concept of the physical suffering and the physical fear, etc.? I know that you're doing a mitzvah, you can't be hurt, and etc. He didn't say any of that. He did not speak about bad happening, because he was not referring to physical suffering. Because that's not what affects a tzaddik. That's not what scares a tzaddik. What then is it? So we just answered question B. You can take it off the table. He emphasized Hashgacha Pratis because it's something different that pained him. Not bad. Because if it's bad, he would have emphasized nothing bad can happen from above. He emphasized Hashgacha Pratis because there's a different type of pain that's hurting him. And as we're going to elaborate in a moment, the Rebbe is going to extrapolate 4 different levels of what that pain can be. And based on the conclusion, that pain is such, that suffering is such, it's so fine, so lofty, that the only way to alleviate it is by the teaching of Hashgacha Pratis, according to the Baal Shem Tov. So let's see. So here's the analysis. I'm going to get rid of this because we just answered it. That second question. Okay. What type of suffering did he have? And just, organize it. So obviously the first thing a person could think, if you don't think about who you're talking about, physical suffering. The Rebbe says this is impossible. You're talking about a tzaddik. As mentioned, not only does he not feel suffering, and the Rebbe puts in the footnote the story of Rab Zusha, the famous story that the Maggid of Bezrich sends someone to Rab Zusha Anapoli, who was poor and had a very, very difficult life, impoverished life, and that the Maggid should explain to him how to deal with suffering with joy. And the Maggid said, I don't know what you're talking about. I never experienced any suffering. This is Zusha Anapoli, which means people on a high level, tzaddikim, they don't feel suffering. That's not about because they're not about the physical. The Rebbe says even further with the previous Rebbe that not only he wouldn't feel suffering, he would feel pleasure. And the Rebbe quotes the story of Rabbi Akiva, who was feeling pleasure almost. He was smiling. He was feeling joy when he was being tortured to death. And they said to him, a student said, to such a degree? And he said to them, you don't understand. My whole life I was waiting for this. My whole life I was hoping that I should have the opportunity to do the mitzvah of Mesiras Nefesh, of self-sacrifice, which is the highest level of devotion to Hashem. Not only is committed with all his faculties and his behaviors, etc., but he's willing to give it all up for Hashem. B'chol nafshecha, with all your life. It's the highest thing. And you can't, in Judaism, you can't voluntarily choose to do that mitzvah, God forbid. But Rabbi Akiva was waiting and hoping that it should be presented to him, and he would embrace it. That's what he said. And therefore, not only was he not in pain as they were combing his flesh with hot irons, unimaginable suffering, he was actually smiling. He was celebrating it because to a tzaddik on such a lofty level, where it's all about the spiritual and it's all about closeness to Hashem, this is not a pain. This is not a suffering. This is actually a pleasure. So therefore, it can't be about the physical. It's a pleasure. And why is it a pleasure? Just to be clear, because what is a tzaddik all about? I want to be close to Hashem. What's the highest closeness to Hashem that a human being can achieve? Mesiras Nefesh. I'm willing to give it all up for Hashem. The Rebbe in footnotes over here says a few things. He says the previous Rebbe in Yud-Tes Kislev, I mentioned this before, of the same year, said to the Hasidim, "Hap Mesiras Nefesh, grab the opportunity of Mesiras Nefesh." It's easy for us to talk about it, but the Hasidim then were building yeshivas and chadorim underground and mikvahs and literally risking life and limb and exile and everything. And the previous Rebbe was telling them that freedom is going to come and it's going to be open and easy to all these things, and we're going to be looking back with envy at those who were able to sit and be imprisoned for doing all these things. So grab Mesiras Nefesh. So you see from the way he speaks, not only he doesn't feel the pain, he feels the joy in it. He expects his Hasidim to have that. Mesiras Nefesh to him was like an opportunity. Mesiras Nefesh. So to say, if he's expecting his Hasidim to say that he himself would have suffering from this physically, it just doesn't make any sense. Further, the Rebbe says in the footnotes that the Alter Rebbe, it's known, had joy from his imprisonment because he was going on a serious nefesh for Torah and for Torah's chassidus, and therefore it brought him tremendous pleasure in a way. The biggest suffering were the few hours in the house of the Misnagid, but when he was in prison and he knew he's going on a serious nefesh for Yiddishkeit and for chassidus, this was actually a joy for him and a pleasure. He would have wanted to stay longer in a sense because he'd be together with the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid of Mezrich who were visiting him. And the Rebbe says in a footnote that the previous Rebbe writes that the same thing happened to him. Previous Rebbe writes that all the stories, I'm quoting, all this is in a footnote in this Sicha, all the stories of the Alter Rebbe, I saw with my own eyes, he said. Es ist nicht durchgegangen, a Viertel Shabbos, ich hab nicht gesehen dem Taten. It didn't go by a quarter of an hour that I didn't see the Rebbe Rashab, my father. So the previous Rebbe himself described that he had the same experience. He saw his father, in a lot of ways it was pleasurable. So what is the pain? What is the pain? It's clearly not physical. So the Rebbe says, let's suggest that it's because the mission is being interrupted. He's on a mission. Hashem gave him a job to be the Rebbe. And that becomes his purpose. And now if you stop him, because now he's in prison, and he doesn't even know if he's going to come out. If you listen to the original tape, it sounds from the Rebbe that he doesn't know if he's going to come out, if he's going to survive it and continue. And therefore, he's in pain. And the Rebbe compares this to Avraham Avinu. There's a famous teaching, the difference between Avraham Avinu and Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva wanted Mesiras Nefesh, as explained earlier. Rabbi Akiva wasn't looking for any Mesiras Nefesh. And in a sense, it's a higher level. Because if I want Mesiras Nefesh, that means at the end of the day, I'm looking for my own spiritual greatness and connection. And what's the highest spiritual greatness? To be on that level, to give it all up for Hashem. But if you're Avraham Avinu, he's such a servant of Hashem that he's just looking for one and only thing, to be able to do the mission of Hashem. He knows the mission of Hashem for which he was chosen is to spread Hashem's oneness. That was Avraham Avinu, and therefore that was his mission. If he'll need Mesiras Nefesh, he'll do it. But actually, he'd prefer not to have Mesiras Nefesh, because that will interrupt the mission. He has a job to do. This is a perfect servant, and it's not about him at all. If you could say so, it's even a greater level than Rabbi Akiva. And therefore, says the Rebbe that the Frierdiker Rebbe, don't compare it to Rabbi Akiva, compare it to Avraham Avinu. He wouldn't feel suffering from physical, but he will also not take pleasure from the physical suffering, from the Mesiras Nefesh, because he is more like Avraham Avinu and his mission is interrupted. That's a big problem for him, because he's very focused, he's mission oriented, he's a servant of Hashem. And the Rebbe points out that Avraham Avinu too, when he was imprisoned, this is from the original tape, he felt suffering because he had a mission to do and he couldn't do it. So don't tell me I'm on a high level now and they're throwing me into a fiery furnace. I can't do my mission. I'm pained by it. That's the suffering of Avraham Avinu, says the Rebbe. That would be suggested. That would be the suffering of the Frierdiker Rebbe of his imprisonment. That was so difficult to endure. But the Rebbe says that's not sufficient, because if we're going to say that his suffering was just that his mission was interrupted, but clearly he knows that everything is by Hashgacha Pratis. He knows deeply that everything is by God's plan. So if it's interrupted, it was meant to be interrupted. He did his part. He is on a mission, and now reality has stopped him, which means Hashem has stopped him. So what can he do? He did everything he can do. There's nothing left for him to do, and therefore he has no need to be in pain, suffer from the fact that his mission is interrupted. There's nothing more he can do. He knows that everything is by God's hand and everything is by Hashgacha Pratis. So it should bother him, I guess, that the mission is interrupted, but he's done everything. So therefore, the question goes back, what's the suffering of the Rebbe Rayatz and the previous Rebbe? So the Rebbe goes a step further, and this is a giant step further. And the Rebbe says, the Rebbe here is going to compare the Frierdiker Rebbe not just to Avraham Avinu, that's a step above of Rabbi Akiva, but to Moshe Rabbeinu, as we're going to see, is a step above, so to speak, of Avraham Avinu. We're talking about comparing giants among giants, but the Rebbe makes the point that this was the Rabbi Amar. That what? That not only he's focused that I have to do my mission, I'm not just looking for my physical pleasure, I'm not even looking for my spiritual revelation, elevation like Rabbi Akiva, I'm just focused on my mission. But furthermore, I intensely focused on the mission being accomplished. It's not just I'm focused on me doing the mission. And if it's interrupted by providence, I say, look, I did everything I can. No. I need the mission to be accomplished. It's almost like he's not just a servant of Hashem, but the language is he's not an Eved Pashut, a simple servant. He's an Eved Neman, he's a servant with a faithful servant, which means that he's so united with the master that what the master wants, he wants. And therefore, it doesn't make him happy, the fact that he did his best that he could and providence stopped him, so he's good to go. He's a partner in the business. The Rebbe tells a whole explanation, the difference between two types of servants of Hashem. One who is like an owner and one who is like a committed employee. And during the daytime, they both look equally committed. If it's a committed, dedicated, honest employee, he's giving it his all, as is the boss. The difference is, at the end of the day, when they go home, the boss takes it with him. The employee does not. Because at the end of the day, the employee says, I put in my day's work, I did everything I could. What do you want more from me? Whereas the employer, whereas the boss, the owner, this is his business. And therefore, it's not about that I did my best. It's about the results. And the Rebbe tells the story of the Rebbe Rashab, who clearly is putting on that same level. That there was a decree, right, against the Rabbonim. That the Rabbonim, that the rabbis who will be ordained in Russia, need to first get some secular education, which the Rebbe Rashab and the other Gedolei Yisrael at the time, great leaders at the time, felt that this would be a tremendous tarnishing of the purity of Jewish leadership, and it will lose its holiness and its etc. And they saw this as a tremendous decree. So they made a gathering, a get-together to meet and to figure out how to stop the decree. And during that, apparently it was a number of days, and during that period of time, the authorities came and told them that this decree must stand. And if they try to break it and avoid it, there's going to be pogroms. So the Rebbe Rashab got up and delivered a speech, an impassionate explanation why this is terrible and evil and wrong and it can't stand against the authorities. And when he finished his remarks, he fainted. Because of his passionate opposition to the government, he was imprisoned in house arrest. They were staying in a hotel for the conference, and they put him in his room, and they put a guard at the door, and he was in house arrest because he was arrested, because he stood up so clearly and impassionately against the government. So the Rebbe tells the story that at some point, one of the great Gedolei Yisrael of the time, it's not printed in the Sicha, but in the tape, the Rebbe says this was Rabbi Chaim Brisker, who went in to see the Rebbe Rashab, and he found him, the Rebbe Rashab is crying. So he said to him, Lubavitcher Rebbe, why are you crying? We did everything that we can. Absolutely everything. And the Rebbe Rashab said, yeah, but the mission has not been accomplished. That Inyan hat sich nicht abgetan. We did everything we can, and therefore we're totally exempt if we're looking at the level of someone who's a total servant. But if we're a servant like at the level of Moshe Rabbeinu, which becomes not just a worker, but an owner, then if the bottom line, the mission wasn't accomplished, he cannot take it, he cannot deal with it. It's a suffering. The Rebbe compares this to Moshe Rabbeinu. We need to understand this is extraordinary quantum leap level from number 2 to number 3. Even number 1, even Rabbi Akiva, this is unbelievable. His whole life is Hashem. And he can't wait for the day that he gives it all up for Hashem. And he has nachas from it. We don't even know what that means. But then we say, no, there's somebody else. He doesn't even want anything. He doesn't want even spiritual delights of being on a high level. He just wants to do his mission because he's a servant of Hashem. This is a whole new level, that even when that mission is interrupted, and who interrupts the mission? Divine providence. It's like Hashem says, okay, you have a day off. He can't stand it. He suffers. Why? Because the mission of Hashem has not been accomplished. Hashem is the one derailing it. It's hard to understand it. But the concept is when you become so dedicated to someone, it's like Moshe Rabbeinu in the Chumash who fights with Hashem when Hashem wants to destroy the Jewish nation. Hashem is saying, but Moshe Rabbeinu knows that ultimately that's not what Hashem wants. That's not what's going to give Hashem nachas. And therefore, someone who is no longer, you could say, a servant, he becomes like an owner. And how do you do that? when your dedication to Hashem is such that you become totally one with Hashem. This is like the highest level of a tzaddik, that you're one with Hashem. The Rebbe in the footnote compares it to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who is described as, if you want to see the face of Hashem, look at Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. How could that be? Because he's totally batal. He's totally null and void. He's literally an extension of Hashem. And therefore, it's not that he wants to serve Hashem. He needs Hashem's mission to be accomplished. And for whatever reason, even by Hashem's own doing, it's delayed. He's pained. He's pained. And he pushes back. Like the Rebbe Rashab, he's not happy. He fainted, he cried, he's not happy. They did the best they can. It wasn't done. And that hurts him to the point of crying. The Rebbe explains in the Sicha that we see this by Moshe Rabbeinu. God tells Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu, you're not going into the Holy Land. Moshe does not accept it, and he prays 515 times, which is the numerical of the word Eschanon, that I beseeched. It's also the numerical of the word prayer, tefillah. 515 times he prayed to change Hashem's mind till Hashem said, stop. You're being a nudnik. Radloch, Hashem gave him a concession that he could see it from far. So it's explained in Torah and in Chassidus, what did Moshe Rabbeinu want? He wasn't looking to eat the fruits of Israel. He wasn't looking, like I like to say, to kick a picture on a camel. He was desperate to push back against the decree 515 times, which is the numerical of the word prayer. So apparently this is like the ultimate prayer. I remember hearing the last years of the Rebbe's Nesias, the Rebbe said for sure after 515 times, and even Hashem told him, no, stop. He for sure didn't stop. That's what the Rebbe said. If you look back in hindsight, the Rebbe was speaking to Hashem and praying that there should ever be a Gimel Tammuz. And apparently he was told, stop. And he said, but I can't stop. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't stop after 515 prayers either. But why? Hashem said, no, it's not meant to be. Because Moshe knew this will hurt the Yidden and therefore hurt Hashem. Because if Moshe would go to Eretz Yisrael, there would be right away Beis HaMikdash and right away would be Mashiach. There would never be the destruction 1, destruction 2, and all the Churbanis and all of the Holocausts and Inquisitions and sufferings and exiles. The story would be ended right there, live happily ever after. And instead, it's delayed by thousands of years of suffering of the Jewish people, which really means suffering of the Shekhinah and of Hashem, and the hiddenness of the Shekhinah and of Hashem, and the world living in darkness for thousands of years. Moshe Rabbeinu pushes back, even against Hashem's command. Why? Because his dedication to Hashem is such that he's not trying to do his best. He needs the job to get accomplished. And if he knows it's not going to be accomplished, he can't live it down. It's a tremendous unity. Says the Rebbe, now this is how we're going to explain the Rebbe Rayatz, the previous Rebbe's pain. How could I endure the pain of the imprisonment? He's a Rebbe Rayatz, he's a Rebbe, he's on the level of a Moshe Rabbeinu. And therefore, if the mission is going to be delayed, and the Rebbe says in the Sicha, the original Sicha, that again, as I said earlier, he suspected that it's Chas v'Shalom possible, a decree that he against his life, and he would be taken out. And therefore, the mission would not be accomplished. And even though others would pick up the mission, but he knew his abilities, just like Moshe Rabbeinu, as humble as he was. It's not a conflict that he knew his abilities. He knew that he was Moshe Rabbeinu. He was the most humble person. But as explained many times, and the Rebbe mentions it in this Sicha as well, it doesn't mean you don't know your virtues. Humility from the real perspective, from Chassidus, does not mean you don't know who you are and you're lying to yourself. Moshe Rabbeinu knew that he was the greatest human to ever live. However, he was humble about it because he took it to be that it was a gift. And if someone else had his gifts and his background, his family background, and his talents, he would have been even greater. But with all the humility, he knew exactly what he can do. And therefore, he knew he must go to that land. Because if not, the story is going to be painful for Yidden and for Hashem and for the world. Darkness of the Shekhinah. And the same thing is, the Rebbe said the previous Rebbe knew. If God forbid there wouldn't be the miracle of Yud-Beis, Yud-Gimmel, Tammuz, yeah, the mission will be continued by others, but he knew that no one is him. He knew that it's not going to be the same. He knew that he could do it. And therefore, he was in pain. He was in suffering. The suffering that Moshe Rabbeinu had when he prayed 515 times. It's a whole different suffering. When you read the story of the Frierdiker Rebbe before the Sicha, he was in suffering, he was afraid. How could he endure? They beat him, they threw him down the steps. No. How could he endure the suffering like Moshe Rabbeinu 515 times that he doesn't see the mission of Hashem being accomplished? At least not so well and so quickly. He can't take it. But then the Rebbe says this still can't be it. Because remember, everything's by divine providence. HP, Hashgacha Pratis. Everything's by Hashgacha Pratis. Certainly something that is happening to a Rebbe. And Hashem's plan. It's Hashgacha Pratis. And this is not the same but. This but after number 3 is not the same but as after number 2. The beauty, the importance of the Sicha is to recognize how each step is a successive level. It's not the same. There's no repetitions. The but after 2 was, it's all divine providence, and that's it. You did the best you can. So we rebutted it with this higher level that he cares about the mission being accomplished, not just doing his part. But now there's another but, and that is that everything is by Hashem's plan, and therefore Hashem's plan doesn't just mean, so therefore, no, there's nothing you can do. If this is Hashgacha Pratis, everything will turn out for the best, even better than before. So why is he suffering? He knows that Hashem runs the world, and everything is Hashgacha Pratis. And therefore, the setbacks that he's in prison and whatever might happen to him, in the end, it's going to be good for a greater good. At the redemption and the revelation of Chassidus and Torah that will be successive after that will be much bigger than imaginable. As we saw the results of Yud-Beis Tammuz, the Rebbe said that it was a tremendous darkness, and yet it propelled a tremendous light. He was freed from Russia, and he spread Yiddishkeit in the whole world, and the rest is history. So clearly, and this is Hashem's doing, so why should he be in pain? He knows Hashem knows what he's doing. Not just whatever he wants, but Hashem does what's best for the actual result of the mission. He should have been happy. And here too, he employs the example of Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu is pained that he can't go to the Holy Land. Because he knows that if he doesn't go to the Holy Land, there's going to be a tremendous delay in the Geula, as said earlier. But didn't he know that this is God's plan and that ultimately it will be a much greater Geula, as explained briefly in this Sicha and explained many places in Chassidus, that had Moshe Rabbeinu gone to the land, yes, it would have been an immediate Geula. However, it would not have been qualitatively as great because it would have come as a gift. By Hashem, by Moshe Rabbeinu, there's such a great revelation of Hashem through Moshe. Moshe is on that level where the Jewish people are just swept away with the revelation of Moshe Rabbeinu, a little bit like the Jews in the desert. And it wouldn't be what's called avodah b'koyach atzmai. It wouldn't be accomplished by the people, by the Jews themselves, through their hard work of searching and finding and overcoming challenges to make the Dira b'tachtonim. So therefore, it would have been quicker. But qualitatively, the delay, and it's a very dangerous and scary delay of 3,500 years. But that delay, of course, Hashem wanted it. And not only is it just a delay to nudge us and give us a hard time, but because it creates a whole new Dira b'tachtonim that it will be done through our work, 3,000 years of Yidden, not Moshe Rabbeinu's, regular Yidden, enduring, etc., and with their own work, including the work of the Galus, the Shekhinah to the world. So it's an extraordinarily different level. The ultimate result when Mashiach comes will be a whole different revelation than it would have been had Moshe just gone into the land. It's not a place here to explain in detail, but this is a pivotal thing in Chassidus. Anything that's gifted from above is peanuts by comparison with that which you earn with your own service. It's a whole different level. And therefore, this is why Hashem did it. Just like the golden calf, which brought the second Luchos, was the worst day, but really the greatest day. Because it brought down the Torah to a different level. And now we have the Gemara and the whole Torah Shabbat Peh. Every step back is a huge step forward. So therefore, we're back to the question. What was the previous Rebbe pained by the fact that the mission is not accomplished because there's a setback and he's afraid that now he's in exile and he's in prison and he can't do the mission. He doesn't know if he'll be able to continue either. This is Hashem's plan. And not only should he accept it because Hashem's plan, he knows it will be a better result, which it was. So what's the pain? He should have been happy. It's really the same question on Moshe Rabbeinu. Why is he complaining? He should have accepted it. Instead, he's complaining 515 times. So here the Rebbe brings this tremendous, mind-blowing concept. And that is, of course he knows in the end it's going to be good. But in the meantime, it's not. And the Rebbe points out that even this temporary pain and suffering of the Jewish people, and thereby the delay of the mission being accomplished, and the suffering of the Shekhinah, he cannot tolerate it. The Rebbe explains some other places in Chassidus that the previous Rebbe himself says that the whole concept of tzimtzum, of the concealment of godly light, which really was a tremendous thing. It brought about the world. It brought about the revelation. Through tzimtzum, we're able to exist, and we're able to, by free choice, bring Hashem back to the world. But the previous Rebbe says at the end of the day, the tzimtzum is not what Hashem wants. He does it for the greater good. But right now, it's a darkness and a concealment. Hashem wants revelation. Therefore, ultimately, so this becomes the answer. It's about the suffering and what hurt the Frierdiker Rebbe so much that he was wondering how he was going to endure it is number 4. Not physical suffering, not just the fact that his mission is interrupted, not just the fact that the mission is not going to be accomplished. He knows that the mission will be accomplished. And it'll be accomplished even greater because of this temporary suffering. But how could it be that right now the work of Hashem is delayed, and right now there is darkness and there is, closing of Chadorim and whatever it is that the Rebbe Ratz was doing and spreading Yiddishkeit? This is unconscionable. It's unacceptable to him. And therefore, the Rebbe gives an example elsewhere that there's a principle that the suffering of the Jewish people is compared to the pressing of an olive. The Jewish people are compared to the olive. When you take the olive and you crush it, it brings out its oil. And what's the value of that analogy? Because as beautiful as an olive is, oil is considered a much greater thing than olives. You have an olive, but then now you have oil. And therefore, it's sort of worthwhile, God forbid, the crushing of the olive to bring to the oil. It's a whole new level. What are olives compared to oil? However, during the process of the crushing, it's neither olive nor oil. It's nothing. It's useless. So use that by the analogy. We had the Beis HaMikdash, let's call it olive. Then you have the Golus, which is the crushing. Then you have Mashiach, which is the oil. And it's worth the crushing to come to the oil. But in the meantime, what do you have? You got nothing. You don't have a Beis HaMikdash, you don't have Mashiach. You got a crushed olive. And therefore, to a tzaddik, this momentary concealment of Hashem and darkness, this is unacceptable. This is impossible to endure. And that's what the previous Rebbe is pained by. Once the Rebbe comes to this conclusion, now the Rebbe is able to answer the question of the Sicha. What was the main question? I'm reminding you that there were 2 questions. The second question was, why does he, in general, have to evoke Hashgacha Pratis? He could just say the principle, nothing bad happens from above. And he's not in danger because Hashem protects those who do mitzvahs. But we threw that out the window right away because we know it's not about physical suffering. And therefore, that was never his concern to begin with. So, of course, he didn't evoke those Talmudic languages that nothing bad could happen and I'm safe. It wasn't about his safety. What it was about was how could, for one moment, Hashem's mission be blocked and darkened, etc. This is unacceptable. And he said, this will answer the main question of the Sicha. The previous Rebbe said that the Rosh Hashanah prior, in the Maimon, he found himself saying, so to speak, involuntarily, the teaching of the Baal Shem Tov about Hashgacha Pratis. And the Hashgacha Pratis that the Baal Shem Tov teaches above and beyond the classic teaching of Hashgacha Pratis by Jewish classics. Namely, that the Hashgacha Pratis only on the human race. But the Baal Shem Tov says the Hashgacha Pratis even on domen, tzomea, chai, inanimate plant and animals, even a leaf in the forest. And only that's the thing that got him through it. So the Rebbe explains, I'll tell you why. Remember, the pain here is about the interim stage. We know the goal, we know the end is going to be good. But we know in the interim, it's not good in order to get there. We're crushed the olive to get the oil. and the interim stage bothers him. Because right now it's a state of darkness and bad, and there's a concealment of the Shekhinah. We know we're coming to the ends, but the ends don't justify the means to him. Says the Rebbe about the teaching of the Baal Shem Tov teaches that there's divine providence in everything that happens, even things that are only seem to be a means to an end. There's nothing that's really just a means to an end. What does it mean? The Baal Shem Tov says that everything that happens is by providence, a leaf in the forest. How? Providence should be on the human being whose job is to serve Hashem. What do we care about a leaf in the forest? In fact, the Rebbe says that even according to the other opinions, Rambam, etc., if there is an animal or a plant that's affecting the person, of course there's providence on that too. Anything affecting the person. Hashem decides if my animal should be healthy or not. If my jugs should break or they shouldn't, even though they're an animal, but they're affecting the human. So even Rambam would agree that there's divine providence on those things because they directly affect the human. When Baal Shem Tov comes along and says that every single thing is providence, he means even the one that's not directly affecting the human. It's the middle of a forest somewhere, it's a little leaf. And Baal Shem Tov says further, not just there by divine providence, but all of these are pivotal to the vast eternal plan. And how could Baal Shem Tov? So what's the takeaway of that? That there's no such thing as a means to an end. The means are the ends. There's a leaf in the forest, there's a tree in the forest, there's an animal somewhere in the wilderness, there's an insect, who knows where. That insect and what happens to it, and let's just say will never interact with a human being, is not only important, it's providential and is of consequence to the vast eternal plan. The way to understand this is because the Baal Shem Tov's innovation, the innovation of Chassidus is that Hashem Echad means that literally everything is one. If everything is one, there can't be anything that's not pivotal and consequential and part of the plan. There's no such thing as separate beings. It's all part of the Achdus Hashem, and therefore all of it is pivotal. And if that's the case, everything it's a means to the end. It's part of the ends. There has to be an end right now. And therefore the Frierdiker Rebbe is then able to endure that he's sitting in prison and in a dark time. He knows that right now there's also light. The means are part of the ends. There's goodness happening in the pain and in the darkness. Because it's all Hashem Echad. That's the Hasidic teaching, and that's the Baal Shem Tov's teaching of Hashgacha Pratis. The means are pivotal, not to bring to the end. There, in a sense, they're also an end. Because there is no divisiveness in Hasidus. Everything is really critical and essential. And therefore, he's sitting in prison. Right now, there's a way to reveal Hashem's light. And the Rebbe says how he did it. First of all, the Hasidim were inspired during that time, the imprisonment, more so than ever before. So right there was a great light. What's light? We want to bring out the neshama. We want to bring out the inspiration, the connection to Hashem. It came out in the Hasidim in a greater way than without the darkness. And number two, the Rebbe says, the fact that the Frierdiker Rebbe went into prison with a resolution that he will not give them a second thought, the enemies. He will, in his mind, he will recognize that they're null and void. And we're not talking about, the border control at the Canadian border to go to Montreal. We're talking about the Soviets who had no problem giving you a bullet to the head in 5 seconds. And he came to the place where they don't exist. And the Rebbe says, which means that he created the concept of Ened Mulvade. What's the whole purpose of creation? To show that everything is Hashem. He did it right there. Not that this is just going to bring to a greater thing. As we said earlier, that too. But the ultimate teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, Achdus Hashem and Hashgacha Pratis, is on every single creature, even if it seems to be far-fetched and unrelated to the purpose. It can't be unrelated. Each thing is pivotal. And therefore, look at the example. In that moment of darkness, he created the greatest light. How so? Within this tzaddik, it was clear that evil is nothing in the face of Hashem. That's the purpose of creation. And he did it. He brought the greatest light to the darkness. And therefore, the previous Rebbe had to emphasize the Hashgacha Pratis according to the Baal Shem Tov. And now this gives us this extraordinary teaching. The Rebbe finishes the Sicha by saying that what's the takeaway? The takeaway is clearly that we have to be emphatic about doing the shlichus. That's number one. Previously, Rabbi said I wouldn't survive the pain. So what's the pain? We have a mission to do. And we need to care not just about doing our part, but the mission happening. And we need to always be pushing forward. But the flip side of it is that even when temporarily or what have you, there's a moment when we don't feel we could fulfill the mission, we need to know there's a mission to be found right there in the thing that we cannot fulfill the mission. Not that just we'll bring till later. Right now, there has to be something good. You know, I'm thinking of the most horrific moments. You know, think about the middle of the Holocaust. I mean, we can't even imagine. The greatest darkness, physically, spiritually, everything. And then you hear a story about a mother taking a newborn child or a father who's deceased and giving him a bris. Right there, and obviously we know that this is the lowest point of the Jewish nation, and clearly it's going to bring to the greatest light. But the Sicha wants us to see, for example, in such stories of heroics, this was the greatest revelation of Hashem, of the neshama, of a Yid. Imagine a Yid doing such a thing. The same thing is Soviet Jews asking for brisson at older ages. This darkness itself becomes a light. I remember during COVID, Rabbi Korf was in the hospital, right, for months and months, and everybody was davening for him. And in the end, he was taken. But they showed how he was reading his Rambam, struggling to get through the Rambam in the last days before, you know, maybe before the end of his life. And you could say, the story had a sad ending. Of course, we're not happy with the ending. But remember, nobody lives forever. What's the purpose? The purpose is we are here to embody the Shekhinah, to bring the Shekhinah down. Can you bring the Shekhinah down in a greater way than sitting in a hospital where you have a hard time breathing and your worry is to finish the daily Rambam because the Rebbe said to do it? The Nasi and the Navi Adar said to do it, and that becomes your concern and your preoccupation? It's the darkness, which in a sense itself is the greatest light. Hashem should spare us. We're waiting for Mashiach. We want to have openness and light and health and everything good, and protection for Israel and for the Jewish people. But the reality is, until that moment, if a person is going through a moment where they're not able to do the shlichus, God forbid somebody's suffering because of physical or emotional illness or financial straits, whatever it might be, and I'm in a moment where I can't function, let's call it. How you see it, but it happens. I'm a moment where I'm not functional. I can't do my shlichus. So you think it's over. And you evoke your emunah but this must be a greater good. That's true too. But this Sicha says further, there's a shlichus for you right now in this not good. Not that the bad will bring good. The bad itself is better. I'm playing on the words bad, better. Rahman al-Islam spare us from this betterness. But in the event that a person's in a position where they feel they can't do the shlichus, it hides itself is greater. That's what the Sicha wants from us. Because to a Rebbe, to our Rebbe especially, there's no such thing, the temporary bad. A moment of suffering for a Yid, a moment of suffering for Klal Yisrael, a moment of suffering for Hashem, a moment of the divine concealment is in eternity. Is eternity. And therefore, the Rebbe says, no. In there, find the goodness. It's not really concealment. Even as we don't accept it and we hope and pray and we know that there's going to be a greater light. So let's apply it to us. Gimel Tammuz. The Sicha is telling us, on the one hand, we should feel to some degree a suffering that's unimaginable. How could it be? How could it be? What's going on? What's going on around here? That makes no sense. There's a concealment that's unacceptable. And we know that it's, however, we know that it's going to be a greater good. Just like Moshe Rabbeinu didn't go to Eretz Yisrael, we have to have a Gimel Tammuz. And there's no question that this is by Hashgacha Pratis, and there's no question that not only it's going to bring a greater accomplishment and people have attempted to make explanations. Clearly, that's going to be the reality, that Mashiach is going to be in a much greater way because we had to go through this short temporary period of Hasidim without the Rebbe's physical presence. It's going to be beyond. It's going to be worthwhile. However, at the same time, you say, what do you mean? How could it be? And the Rebbe wants that we should be able to sit down even now and recognize that right now there's a greater light in the fact that we have to continue and be Chassidim even now. In a way, there's a greater light. We don't celebrate this light because it's a light coming from darkness. It's a light that's part of darkness. But at the same time, the Sicha wants us to acknowledge it because it empowers us to keep on plugging forward to the day when the lights are put on. What's an example of that darkness? Project Lakut Sichas, and etc. So many other things, expansion of Shlichus, expansion of learning of the Rebbe's Chassidus and of the Sichas in ways that never were imaginable. The whole Lubavitch is learning Sichas every week in an organized way. And you wonder, like, why didn't we do it before? I don't know. But apparently this is a light that only darkness creates. And therefore, the Rebbe wants us to be aware of it. I don't know if he wants us to celebrate it. Previously, Rebbe didn't say that he celebrated his imprisonment, but he endured it because he knew the teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, that there's hashgacha pratis in the plant and inanimate and the animal. Translation, as the Rebbe explains in this Sicha, that everything that is a means to the end, it's part of the ends. It's intrinsic, it's pivotal. And there's kedusha and purpose in every single moment of it.